Good Monday morning. It is a beautiful and bright day in the city of Philadelphia, and we are here this morning at Salt and Light with this year's iteration of Morning Glory. This is the week before our church anniversary, and so to prepare our hearts and our minds, to focus them in the right direction, we will be coming to you every morning this week, every weekday morning, Monday through Friday, with one of the ministers of our church, preaching from our theme this year, which is the theme of reclaiming our hood. So this morning, we are blessed on Monday morning to have Monique Burgess, Minister Monique Burgess, who is coming to preach to us about motherhood. Give her your ear, lend her your time just for a couple of minutes. She'll be with us, and then join us here every morning for the next 5 days as we hear about reclaiming our hood, doing Morning Glory here at Salt and Light.
I was glad when they said unto me, let us go into the house of the Lord. Good morning, and thank you for tuning into this Morning Glory Devotional. In keeping with the theme, Reclaiming Our Hood, I have the pleasure of speaking to you for a few minutes about motherhood. So if you will join me in 2 Timothy chapter 2, verses 3 through 5. And it reads as follows. I thank God, whom I serve as my ancestors did, with a clear conscience, as night and day I constantly remember you in my prayers. Recalling your tears, I long to see you, so that I may be filled with joy. I am reminded of your sincere faith, which first lived in your grandmother Lois and your mother Eunice, and I am persuaded now lives in you also. By the time Paul had written this letter to Timothy, Timothy was a young pastor at a church in Ephesus. He was a faithful servant of Paul, traveling with Paul as Paul preached the gospel. Paul was sitting in a Roman jail cell waiting on his pending death. When he penned these words to Timothy, Paul had written to Timothy to give him some encouragement. These words of encouragement in the verses that I've just read to you will remind Timothy that he will go through some things as a pastor and as a Christian. Paul knew there would be some challenges that Timothy would face running a church in Ephesus. In fact, if you have read 1 Timothy, you will find that Paul was very adamant about Timothy and what he had to preach and teach, and that was sound doctrine of Christ, while at the same time serving and encouraging the church to live their lives for righteousness' sake. Paul wanted Timothy to know your work as a minister to teach the scriptures correctly. And watch this. This also included ministers too that were under his leadership and the saints who were listening, because it was a distraction from his teaching during that time. This was a time where people would preach about or even speak about false doctrine. So Paul wanted to remind Timothy, I need you to be reminded of where you came from. With that in mind, Paul wrote a series of important script verses in 1 Timothy and 2 Timothy that was important for Timothy to preach and teach the gospel, pure and unadulterated. Paul knew sometimes his job as a pastor would be hard and thankless. Paul wanted Timothy to know the job of a pastor is hard, and reminded him that he had learned some things along the way. By this, I mean there are some things that you have learned that can't be undone. Some things that you have learned that cannot be reversed or unsaid. I believe Paul said, Timothy, you traveled around with me since my second missionary journey. That was about 20 years. But I have some things to tell you. I have some things to remind you of. Not from me, though, but from your grandmother and mother. I remember your mother and your grandmother, Lois and Eunice. They were in Lystra when I preached, and they joined the family of Christ. And you were there with them. Timothy, I need you to know that your grandmother and mother passed down something good, something special to you, and it can never be undone or unsaid. You know what they passed down, Timothy? They passed down the legacy of faith to you. And I need you to know, Timothy, that your grandmother and your mother are the reason you are preaching today. It is through their faith and their influence that you have heard about Christ, not mine. Saints, Paul gave credit where credit was due. Paul understood what reclaiming our hood meant. Paul knew motherhood was and still is something special. Motherhood is sacred. Motherhood is a calling with a mission. Paul wanted Timothy to know that motherhood is empowering because it set things in motion. I hope you all are with me because this is some good stuff here. You have to understand that in biblical times, Jewish men were responsible for the education of their sons. So we can surmise that Timothy's father wasn't a Jew. Or perhaps he was dead. Or maybe Timothy was a result of divorced parents. Or perhaps his mother was just a side piece and got pregnant. Whatever the case, Timothy's father wasn't there. What we do know is that both Lois and Eunice decided to fulfill their calling to motherhood. They decided to honor the call of motherhood because Jesus created it, Jesus blessed it, and when he decided to bless Mary's womb with him, with us in mind, at the same time. And let us not forget the words from the cross to John when he told him to behold your mother. Lois and Eunice decided to reclaim their hood by standing in agreement and raising Timothy with Christ in mind. You have to understand women didn't have access to the Torah, neither were their books. So how did they teach him? They taught Timothy by recall. They remember what had been taught to them. In order for them to do that, they had to pay attention and listen. They didn't get up for a cigarette break. They didn't take a phone call or scroll through Facebook and Instagram. They sat and they listened. And when they were finished, they came back and vomited everything back up that they took and gave it to Timothy. Lois and Eunice understood their assignment. They understood that motherhood was uniquely created for women. On the sixth day, God created her. Her body was designed to grow, to nourish, to carry, to expand, to push. But not only through the womb. That was just one part of God's plan. Motherhood is a job no one else can do. Mothers care for their children. Mothers nurture their children. Mothers feed their children. Mothers teach their children their ABCs and 1, 2, 3s. Mothers teach their children right from wrong. Mothers set their children on the right path to becoming change agents and productive citizens in the world. Isn't Jesus the embodiment of that same human experience as mothers? Jesus, like mothers, bled, labored, birthed, fed, gave sight, wisdom, and instruction. We are commanded to remember the cup of the new covenant. Saints, reclaiming the hood is the heartbeat of the gospel. So it doesn't matter if you are a biological mother, a stepmother, godmother, grandmother, foster mother, or spiritual mother. Motherhood enables you to lay down the things that you cannot keep for the people you cannot afford to lose. There are eternal souls on the line, and they are our children on our mission field. Jesus have enough eternity to give to everyone. I know you think mothering may not be so profitable, but it is essential to honoring the call of motherhood as a biblical blueprint for thriving homes and communities. Lois and Eunice should encourage all Christian mothers and grandmothers to reclaim their hood by reminding them that their godly influence have an eternal impact on the lives and future of their children and grandchildren. Malcolm X said, "The mother is the first teacher of the child. The message she gives the child gives the world." What message are you giving in order to reclaim your hood? Gracious God, thank you for the honor and privilege to stand here and declare your glory. I pray that those under the sound of my voice heard what you have established motherhood, what it was about. I pray, God, that it would just sink down deep in the hearts and soul of mothers and fathers so that they can find out what your design is for this world. It is through people that we bring other folks back to you for your glory. For it's with these blessings we ask in Jesus Christ's name we ask in thanksgiving always. Amen.